From the job site to the code book, this is a Pool Envy podcast, where licensed pool professionals speak up. Code, compliance, craftsmanship. Hosted by Jason Davies. Licensed across Wisconsin, Florida, and Texas. Your deep end starts now.
There is a deeper issue in the pool industry than workmanship, communication, and even sales practices. The deeper issue is that finality is often unattainable. And when finality is unattainable, confusion becomes part of the transaction. A swimming pool is not a simple product. It is not lawn care. It is not pest control. It is not a light service that can be performed and forgotten. At its core, a pool is a complex system. Structure, hydraulics, electrical, circulation, sanitation, finishes, environmental exposure. Each of these elements must function together. That complexity exists where it is acknowledged or not. But pools are often sold as lifestyle purchases. Fun, relaxation, entertainment, and that framing shapes how people approach them. Most customers do not enter a pool project thinking they are managing a technical system. They think they are buying something enjoyable. That difference matters because the project itself does not become less technical simply because it is marketed as fun. At the same time, the industry often operates at a pace that prioritizes movement over structure. Jobs are sold. Jobs are started. Jobs are pushed forward. Documentation is often limited. Standards are not always enforced consistently. Checkpoints are reduced to keep progress moving. So when a problem appears, the entire chain is questioned. What was promised? What was specified? What was installed? What standard applies? Who verified it? And too often, there is no clear path back to those answers. That is the finality problem. Now, consider how customers' behavior interacts with that system. Today, customers have more access to information than ever before. They listen to podcasts. They watch videos. They read forums. And that access creates confidence. But confidence is not the same as understanding. It becomes easy to believe the work is simple, that it is no more complex than basic home maintenance, that it can be handled casually. So people interact with systems they do not fully understand. Equipment is opened. Components are handled without context. Shortcuts are attempted, not out of negligence, but because the system appears approachable. It sits outside. It's tied to recreation. It feels accessible. Now compare that to something inside your home. Many people will not open their furnace. They will not take apart their electrical panel. They recognize those systems require trained handling. Pools do not always receive that same respect because they're associated with enjoyment. That creates tension between provider and client. The provider carries responsibility and liability. They are expected to deliver a correct system. The client feels ownership and access. They want to engage with what they purchased. When those two positions are not aligned, friction builds. That is where you begin to hear customers get fired. The phrase is not about attitude alone. It is about control, responsibility, and risk. When a system cannot be clearly defined, documented, and protected, the provider cannot stand behind it with confidence. And when the client feels restricted from interacting with it, they may see those boundaries as interference rather than protection. Now, shift into commercial pools. The environment changes, but the problem does not disappear. In commercial settings, the person asking questions is often not spending personal money. A department is spending it. An organization is spending it. A board is spending it. So the process can become filled with questions that sound important, but do not control the outcome. How long have you been around? How many jobs do you do? What's the warranty? Those questions may have value, but they do not determine whether the work will be defined, documented, and executed to a standard. What makes this more concerning is that commercial pools are governed more heavily. The standards are greater, the exposure is greater, the consequences are greater, yet the expectation often reduces to cost less. So the system boundary becomes contradictory. Higher regulation on paper, commodity thinking in practice. And when this happens, finality becomes difficult again. Because the process looks structured, but the critical questions are not being asked. Now take that one step farther into HOA environments. This is where the problem becomes even more complex, because responsibility is shared, but pressure is concentrated. An HOA pool is not a backyard pool. It is a public-facing system. Multiple users, higher risk, greater liability. It should be treated accordingly. But the decision-making environment is very different. You now have a group of individuals, each with their own expectations, interacting with a shared system. Some want it working immediately. Some want it inexpensive. Some want it convenient. And all of that pressure lands on a system that still requires technical control. What develops is a kind of collective pressure. Not necessarily organized, but very real. The expectation becomes, get it working. Not, is it correct? Is it safe? Is it compliant? Is it documented? And when those questions are not prioritized, the system is pushed forward without pause, because the priority becomes restoring use, restoring enjoyment, avoiding disruption. From the outside, it can look like urgency. From a technical perspective, it is often the removal of necessary checkpoints. The provider is now operating in a space where they are responsible for a public system. They carry liability. They are expected to maintain standards. At the same time, they are facing pressure from multiple directions to move faster, reduce cost, and restore access. That is not a stable system. That is a system where accountability is diluted, but expectation is amplified. And again, finality becomes difficult. Because if something goes wrong, the question is no longer simple. Who made the decision? Who approved it? What standard was applied? What was documented? Without clear answers, the situation becomes another version of the same problem. Multiple voices, limited structure, no clean path back to truth. Across all three environments, residential, commercial, and HOA, the pattern is consistent. A complex system is being treated as something simpler than it is. Standards are not always centered. Documentation is not always prioritized. Responsibility is not always clearly defined. And when those elements are missing, finality is difficult to achieve. Disputes linger. Outcomes remain unclear. Responsibility becomes negotiable. That is the core issue. Not just poor workmanship, not just poor communication, but a system that too often fails to produce a clear, defensible conclusion when it matters most. And once you recognize that, the focus changes. The question is no longer just who is doing the work. It becomes what systems govern the work. What standard defines it? What record supports it? And what path exists to bring it back to truth? Because without that, everything remains open. And when everything remains open, the outcome rarely is.
This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice, and it is not site-specific engineering, code, or safety determination. All field conditions should be evaluated in context. Thanks for listening to the Pool Envy Podcast, where licensed pool professionals speak up. Hosted by Jason Davies, licensed across Wisconsin, Florida, and Texas. For more insights, subscribe and join us next time.